Howdy, Walter.
Hey Matt, how are you?
Doing pretty well.
Cool. So are we ready for the call?
I think so. I'm trying to get my kids corralled out of the
Yeah, I can
area.
hear them.
I sent the Hangout link to Vaughn just now, so.
I'm trying to test the screen sharing.
I see me.
Okay, that works then. Does it work? You see my desktop?
I do.
Okay, cool. Okay. So I prepared a basic demo. I don't think it will take the full hour, but maybe more than half an hour or so.
I think that's fine.
Cool.
Good morning.
Morning, Matt. So Vaughan, do you want to discuss the in addition to the parameters? That's what I prepare, essentially a basic demo of the parameters, and we had on the agenda discussing provenance and maybe the SDK. Do you want to discuss that?
Yeah, I think we should. I think folks should know that they're both coming.
Okay, maybe we.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, just that these are coming, and that um, there will be changes. There'll be changes to the way that you need to do Adama development in order to support the provenance model.
Okay.
Because
So
we have to do it in the library. So
okay, yeah, perfect. Yeah. So we mentioned the library too.
but it should be lightweight, and we'll try to make it as painless as we can. But
yeah. Okay. So okay. Cool.
yeah.
Are my kids still that audible?
Oh, it's awesome.
No. I even have like the headset and everything, and it's still not.
Are they joining the Hangout too?
Yeah, hopefully not.
So before the dog. So I don't know if we let him. I don't know if we let our dogs out during the Christmas party, but I've got this little brown and white Papillon, and he's pretty copacetic. But but I had a Chihuahua before when I was at Cold Spring Harbor, and that little sucker would come and bark at the strangers on conference calls. It was so irritating. He would stand at my door and just bark like there was some dangerous thing going on.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, he was feeling an intruder virtually.
He was exactly. There were intruders, and then if you let him into the room, then he would like charge at the desk and stuff. So, yeah, that was entertaining. It's really fun to do. Well, I guess Office wasn't his to protect.
I guess some dogs are not used to the digital age.
Totally.
So I added the QA app to this, so hopefully people will be able to ask questions with the little QA app on the side now.
Hey, there it is.
Where do you see it?
You see the little set of icons along what would be your left side there?
Uh-huh. Ah, yeah.
That's QA.
Cool.
Ask your audience. I don't see how do you. So, do you have to ask the audience to submit questions? So I just popped it up, and it doesn't actually. I don't understand how to ask a question.
Yeah,
I think if you're a watcher, you're able.
Ah, we need to join the.
Okay.
So I added the link to the Google Doc in the showcase on the Hangout, and also to the developer call page on the Araport site.
Oh, there it is. Cool. Yeah. All in all, this is pretty nice. Pay a lot more for this and not have it work as well. So
I still cannot see how to. I cannot get a prompt for the questions or.
I think if you don't have if you're not a viewer, if you're an audience member, you should be able to ask the questions. You have to
Yeah,
join as an
I
audience
click
member.
on the. I click if I'm going to watch
Hmm.
the presentation.
Let's see if I can. There's a little grid up in the top corner, or in the top right of the display. Little white grid, and if you click over to the QA.
oh, there it is. Oh, Steve's in as a watcher. He said hi, all.
Yep. He said,
Yeah, I see that.
all right.
Cool. Might be worth pointing that out to people so they know to open the QA app. I don't know if it will work. I don't know if it'll open automatically.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I think you have to click the little thing to get it to, because the showcase, I think, is what opens by default.
Gotcha.
All right.
All right. Well, I'm going to kill my camera. Yeah.
All right. Well, it's right at 10 o'clock. We've got a few people joining the calls. The call. I think we'll give it just another minute. If you look in if you're watching the broadcast and you look in the Hangout at the top right of the broadcast, you should see a little white grid icon, and then you can switch between the Hangout apps of the Showcase, which I believe is the default, and the QA, which will allow you to ask questions or even just sort of open up a dialogue and interact with us during the call. Also in the showcase, I've added the link to the Google Doc for today's call notes. It has the agenda and everything there. So feel free to jump on there and add any questions, comments, or feedback down below. Well, I think we should probably go ahead and get started then. Welcome to today's Araport Developers Call. We've learned a little bit more about the Hangout platform after 2 weeks ago's first call, and we've added the little QA app to the Hangout this time. If you look in the top right of the broadcast, there should be a little white button that looks like 9 little squares. If you click on that, you can switch to the QA app, which should allow you to ask questions or make comments and get a little bit easier way to interact with us on the call. Also, I shared on the showcase for the Hangout the link to the Google Doc. I see several, if not all, of the people on the call have made it to there, and there you can see the agenda that we put together today. The main topic they're going to be talking about today, which may not take the full hour, but we're going to talk about a little bit more about the newest stuff that's coming in Adama. Walter is going to give us a little demo of some of the stuff that he's been working on, and then we'll go from there. So I think at this point, Walter, why don't you take it away?
Sure. Okay. So what we wanted to show today about Adama is maybe going to the first point in the agenda. So let's do a very, very quick review to remember what the main goal of Adama is, and then let's go over an example of the new functionality which we think is a very small incremental improvement, but I think it's going to make a lot of difference for discovering APIs to help people use the APIs that you develop, and that is the automatic documentation of the parameters. So maybe let's remember what Adama is, and then let's do a quick refresh of how to register an adapter. So the main goal of Adama is essentially to build web services. The idea is that we have a lot of interesting web services on the web that we want to use, and a lot of data that we want to present through kind of RESTful web services, different data types, and we want to federate all that data through the Araport website. So Adama is essentially, at the fundamental level, just a very, very easy way to build web services. The idea is that Adama will abstract all the infrastructure that you need to build a web service, like setting up a web server, scalability, caching, authentication. All that will be handled by Adama, and you can only concentrate on the business logic of your web service. And the main idea is that those web services that you are going to build as a developer in Araport are just a small transformation and small compositions of existing web services. So we are not going to develop a full-blown API or web service in Adama, but it's more of a composition and mashup of existing web services, existing data on the web. So the idea is that what we call an adapter. An adapter will be a small function in a given language. Right now, the developers know that Adama now supports just Python, but we are going to support, we plan to support other languages JavaScript, Ruby, and we are open to requests from the community to prioritize those. So you write small functions in Python, and that already gives you a web service. So what I'm going to do right now is to make this very concrete, going to share the screen, and we are going to do a basic demo of what it means to be an adapter and to register an adapter, and then we go to the new functionality of documenting the parameters. So let me see if this works. Okay, so hopefully you are seeing my desktop now.
Yeah, it looks pretty good to me.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Matt. So what I'm going to use here is instead of the curl command that many people maybe used to, I'm going to use a new command that we are really recommending now. Is called the HTTP. It's an easier way to do requests. So and I'm going to check, for example, now my access to Adama. This current version of Adama that I'm going to show here and the one that I put on the document, maybe let me point you to the document first so you can read it at the same time. On the agenda, you may have seen the link to this document, which talks about documenting parameters. So we are going to work against this development version of Adama, which is just a sandbox. We can break it, no damage to the existing functionality in the real Adama. And if you have this document on your desktop, you can follow along. I'm going to essentially describe this on the demo. So let's go back to the basic operation that we do is to check that we have access to Adama. And so this is Adama dev, cloudapp.net, community.
Hey, Walter, can you increase the font size on your terminal, please, so it's a little bit more visible
sure.
to people on the call? Thanks.
How does it look now?
I think that's better. Looks better to me.
Okay, hopefully if someone is not able to see, maybe he or she can write on the questions or the Google Doc.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh. So let's one more. So here what I'm going to do is a request to Adama community version 0.3 is going to be 0.4 when we release these parameters, and I'm going to check the status of Adama. So if this goes well, you should see that the request was a success and the version that we are interacting is 0.3. Again, this is just a development sandbox, so that's why the version is 0.3 is going to be 0.4. So the way that we register an adapter is that we create a Git repository with the function that we want the service to have. So I created an example adapter here on GitHub. Again, the link is on the document, on the documenting parameters document. And this is a very, very simple adapter. It has one function and it has the metadata to describe the service. So let's look at the metadata first. And this is already includes an example of the parameter. So let's pay attention to the first two lines. What I'm describing here is this adapter. It has the name myAdapter, and it's going to be type query. You probably remember that there are 4 types of adapters. We don't want to complicate things now. We are going to talk of the most simplest case, which is a query. A query adapter just do a search on a third-party service and returns the output through a GET. And let's talk about the parameters later. So now let's concentrate on these 2 lines, just the name and the type of adapter. And the function that we are going to register, let's look at the function now. It's a Python function, a Python module main. And it's a very, very easy one. So we write a function search, which takes some arguments and does some processing with those arguments. We are going to show this later because it refers to the arguments. And it prints JSON documents to the output. So this may sound a little bit abstract. I didn't want to complicate things by doing a real Araport example. So what you have to imagine is that in this section is where you do the processing, the mapping, or the transformation on the data that you want to present in your service. So in this section, you are accessing a third-party web service, let's say some database on the web or some genetics data. You do some processing here, and then you return, you print whatever is your result. And that is going to be your web services, your new web service that is going to be hosted in Araport. So that is the very, very basic. So once we have these 2 pieces of data, the function, the main function, and the metadata, metadata just describes the name, the type of the adapter, maybe some other information. We can register the adapter in Adama, and that will create our web service. So let's do that now as an example. So I have this sample parameter docs as a Git repository on GitHub. And post request. Don't pay too much attention to this verify equal no. That means do not check the certificate because we are doing HTTP secure request. But since this is a development instance, we don't have a valid certificate. So it's just a technicality. So and I created here
Walter, can you possibly repeat what you just said? I'm sorry, I think your audio cut out for a second there.
Sorry, yes, about the certificates?
No, whatever you may have said after the certificates.
Okay. I'm going to do a post request to Adama with the Git repository that I'm going to show now, and that will do the registration of the adapter. So let's just follow this line. I'm going to do a post to Adama, community, the version, and the namespace. I just created a test namespace that I call dev call because of the development call. And I'm going to post to the endpoint services. And here the parameter that I give is get repository equal, and then the URL of this Git repository that I created before as an example. So you can see on GitHub under my username there is these two pieces of data as a Git repository. So I'm going to copy the URL. And we are going to insert it here. This will register the adapter in Adama. So if all goes well, what Adama is doing now is checking out the Git repository and creating the web service for you. So let's give it a few seconds. It's taking time for the checking out. And see, if everything goes well, you see a message that says the registration started. So right now, the backend is processing your adapter, trying to make everything wire up so that it's ready. And we can check the status to see if it's ready by accessing this URL. So remember that your service gets the name, which is the URL of Adama, together with the namespace, and then the name of your adapter plus the version. So if we do a request here, ready to use, and it is, you see a lot of statistics, what Hanlon called nerd stats. And don't worry too much now. The important thing is that it seems ready. So now you can do queries against this service. So how do you do a query to the service? And what is going to happen is you use the name of the adapter and you endpoint. This is just a particular endpoint that is meaningful for the query adapter. There are other adapters like a pass-through, which has the access endpoint and so on. But this is what is going to call your Python search function. Okay, the parameters to your function, the one that you wrote in Python, are what we are going to write after here as query parameters. That's why it's called query adapter. For example, x equals 3, y equals 6, z equals 1, w equals 1. So if I do this, I'm going to do a query. That means it's going to call your function search in the module main.py with the parameters x equals 3, y equals 6, z equals 1, and w equals span. And this gave an error, which is very sad because I forgot to quote this. So see here, what we did is to call your function, and if you remember, the function was printing out some results: x equals 3, y equals 6, z equals the array 1.0, and w equals span. So that is actually all that Adama does, but we think it's a very powerful scheme because it allows you very easily to construct web services from existing web services. So we didn't have to write anything about HTTP calls or web servers. We didn't have to configure anything, and we got a web server, a web service. Sorry. So I guess there are no questions on on the okay. So let's talk then in that case about the parameters. What does it mean to document the parameters for this function? The problem here that we are trying to solve is when you are given a service, you register your service, your very useful my adapter, you register this web service. How does another person knows about how to use your adapter without having to go and look at your Git repository, reading the code of your function, and so on? We don't want other person to do that, right? We just want to make really explicit how to use the adapter in the documentation. So there wasn't any way before, and what we are doing now is to allow the description of the parameters in the documentation. So let's go back pieces of information that we gave on the adapter, and let's go back to the metadata. Now we just discussed these two lines, which were the names and the type of adapter. Now let's go what is below. What I'm showing below is the description of the parameters and the parameters types that this function is going to take. So here I'm describing the endpoint search that we just used and what parameters that endpoint is going to take. So here you can see that I'm describing a parameter with name X. It has some documentation about what it means. Again, this is very abstract. Please have your examples in mind, which you can do much better than I. But this is the description of what the parameter does, the type of the parameter, and whether it is required or if it is optional. So here you see that X is required, so it will be mandatory for the user when it's calling the adapter to include this parameter. But you can see the parameter Y. Parameter Y is actually optional, and it's actually an integer. And it's not only optional, but if you don't pass the parameter Y, then you can specify a default value. In this case, the number 5. And there are other useful types that you can specify. For example, you can specify the parameter, which is an array of numbers. So that is very useful because you know exactly what you have to pass. Not only an array, but it's an array of numbers, not an array of strings or an array of integers. This one is supposed to be an array of doubles. And the last type that we want to mention that is really useful, and you are going to see why, is an enumeration. So in this case, we are describing the parameter W, which is a string, but it can take only one of these two values, spam or X. And that's only that it accepts. That is very, very useful. There is no confusion for the user who is going to use this adapter, which values to put here. Is one of these two. And your function will act accordingly. So the interesting part about this is that not only documents the parameters, but if you look at this piece of information, validate request equally yes, that means that Adama is going to validate the parameters for you. So the function main .py that we wrote, the module, sorry, the function search inside the module main.py is guaranteed to to get this parameter. So you as developer, you don't have to test whether the parameter x was a string or whether the parameter y was missing or not, or if it was an integer. You have complete guarantee that all this is satisfied inside your function. So you just do the logic that you want to do. And that's what we want to make with Arama the easiest way possible, the least possible code to write for you. So let's see. Right now, this is how we document, but what do we get in return by doing all this writing? That's the key. So automatically, when you write that in the
before you go on, there's a question I think that sort of is a little bit before this, related to exceptions in your main.py.
Yes, I saw the question from Steve. I was planning to address that.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, go on. I just want to make sure that you saw that.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I will answer that question in a minute, Steve. Let me show you what we get by describing those parameters. So if we do a request, remember that this is our endpoint, right? Search, our adapter. But now if instead of this endpoint, I look at the endpoint docs, then what this does is to render a full description of the API of your adapter. This description is a Swagger 2.0 specification, which actually is not really meant to be for human consumption. It's more machine readable. But the nice thing is that there are many tools that will process this information that you are just seeing here. And one of the tools that will process this is what we call the Swagger UI, the user interface. And I'm going to show you right now. You can go to the browser and enter the URL. Let me do this bigger. Okay, cannot do bigger. You enter the URL of your adapter, and you look at the endpoint docs/Swagger. And if this goes well, you see a rendering of the documentation of your parameters. See, here is all the data that we describe. We didn't put much text, but we are describing my adapter version 0.1. We are describing a get operation on the search endpoint. And we are describing the parameters. Some of them are mandatory, some others are optional with a default value. And you can see the types. This should be a string, this should be an integer, this should be an array of doubles, and this should be a string. And see how nice, since it's a fixed number of values, you just can select here spam or X. And you can give it a try. For example, I can fill something here, and you can try it out. And this does a request to Arama and displays automatically in your browser the response. For example, if you missed something, for example, let's say you write here something which is not a string, sorry, not an integer, and you try it out, you get very informative errors. For example, this string is not an integer. So as a developer, you have a very fail soon type of response. And so right now you are seeing this Swagger UI as a result of accessing the URL of your endpoint directly, but we have plans on Araport to provide a full developers console as a scientific app, which will provide all the documentation for all the adapters together with the documentation for the Agave API, together with the documentation for the base endpoints of Adama, all together in a console that you can browse and discover all the adapters. So that's essentially the new feature that we wanted to showcase, and it's actually ready for playing with. It's not on the real Adama, but as I was saying, you can access this URL, adamadev@cloudapp.net. It's a throwaway instance that we can rebuild easily if it breaks. So if you want to give it a try and then send us some comments, they are more than welcome, and any feedback about what we can do better or any other ideas. So let me answer. Steve was asking me how errors or exceptions are handled in the main.py function. So what happens when something bad happens in main.py? The way that Adama reports those errors is exactly like you see here. You will get a response from Adama in the same way as this. It will say that the status was an error, there was an exception, and then you get a message about the exception. So any exception that happens in the code as a Python code, it will bubble up all the way to you, and you get that exact exception. Yeah, it still says that Umit asked that. Okay, answering Umit then. Is right now our goal is not to hide any error, although they are not really the most user-friendly. You can see, for example, this traceback is the Python traceback, and it's a really too low-level information for a developer of an adapter. So this actually ties with the second point which we wanted to discuss in the let me look at the second point that we wanted to discuss about upcoming features, and that is we want to build a Python SDK for very easy adapter development. That Python SDK, actually, we want to include at least 2 pieces of functionality to make your life easier when writing the adapter. We want to handle the errors better. So, for example, we want you to be able to report errors from the main.py in a very easy way, rather than having to throw exceptions. And the other functionality is we want to provide a very easy way to do requests to third-party HTTP services. Right now, the people who have written adapters have done it with the request module of Python, which is a great module, but it's, again, a little bit low level. You have to pass explicitly headers, parameters, handle the response, convert the response from text to JSON, and so on. So we want to provide a little bit easier experience there. And the important thing here is that we still don't have it completely fleshed out, so we are open for comments. And maybe the question that I put to the community here, to the audience, is what are the most common operations, or what are the most easy things that you want to do in an adapter that we could provide for you already as a library for you to use. Maybe we can start a thread on the developer mailing list or similar, but that would be a great way for us to get feedback from the community. The other topic that we wanted to mention as an upcoming feature that we are also requesting comment is about the provenance information.
Hey, Walter, before we get into the provenance discussion on the prov spec,
yes.
There's some more questions about handling errors in your adapters. So Umit had a follow-up question on distinguishing between error types. So you know, the couple of errors that we saw in the example over there was in your demo earlier was related to the
parameters,
the API not validating.
Yes, exactly.
I guess some other types of errors would be an actual, if you make an actual coding error, you know, in your main.py routine, or if there is an error in Adama that causes the request to fail, or an error in the, you know, remote service that you're calling to fail.
That's right. That's perfect, valid, very good questions. So any errors on the code of the adapter, which includes, for example, errors like division by 0. If you do on your code, that's the basic example of an error, or a request error to the third party, or all those returns as an exception, again, because your main.py function will raise a Python exception, and that will bubble up to Adama and return as an error code 400, and with this kind of format. Again, the UL will be the same. The type of exception will change here. For example, if it is because exception was a division by 0, here we'll say division by 0 exception, and you will get some message depending on the exception. If the exception is because you did a request to another HTTP service and you didn't get a valid response, then you'll get an exception from the request module here. So all those are 400 exceptions. If Adama has an error because of a bug, or because it cannot handle some request, then that will be a 500 exception. But the format will be the same. So you will get a message from Adama describing the error, and a traceback, which right now is too low level. But maybe I think the answer is that the UL should be this kind of answer, a JSON object and a specific error code, like 400 if it is an exception in the code, or 500 if it is Adama's fault.
I think that hopefully that answers the question. Umit, if it does not, please let us know. We're happy to elaborate further.
Yes, exactly, and we can keep elaborating on a thread on the Google groups, or any way. We are trying to do the difference between, of course, internals and 400 errors. But what the library, this SDK that we are planning to develop, will allow you is to have more fine control on how to describe those errors. So you can catch those errors in your code and then raise through the library a little bit easier error codes and messages. So that's the idea. So going back to the last point about the provenance, this library that we want to create, this software development kit, we wanted to allow you to do the provenance information automatically too. And with provenance information, we means to transmit back to the through the response where the information came from, so we can do proper attribution about where the data came from, the third-party services. And we are trying to describe the full chain of provenance. For example, if you are combining web services, those web services may already combine other web services, and we want to describe the full tree of information where it came from. Again, we are just fleshing out this, and what we are leaning towards is to try to use the W3 group provenance spec. It's a full-blown spec. It's really big. We are not planning to support all of that, just a very basic subset. But we are really interested in listening from the community about what are the main things that you want to see here, to what information about the data sources, the authors, the institutions you want to transmit back, formats that you would be interested in trying to handle, and so on. So these are the last 2 points that I want to mention again, and we are really open for comments here. And I think that's all from me. I'm trying to read here to see if there are more questions.
No, those are just the ones that I copied from the Hangout, so that they would be recorded here.
Okay, that's great.
Great. Yeah, I think the really cool thing about the ProvSpec thing, if we get it properly designed out, and end to end, from the apps on Araport.org all the way through the Adama infrastructure, is that what we can enable is app developers to build apps using community APIs in Adama, and calling their remote data services, whether they are their own or belonging to other fourth parties at that point, and then automatically display on Araport.org as you're interacting with applications, and making queries and clicking through functionality, where all of the data is coming from.
Exactly.
With sort of real-time data graph almost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that it's really we make it clear to the community that data providers and data producers will get the appropriate attribution and respect for the data that they've developed and produced, but also to make it clear, equally important, that Araport is not claiming ownership of the data that the community is providing through Araport.
Exactly.
We want to make sure that the data owners get the credit for the data. We're only providing infrastructure here.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. If I want to add something, that's one of the key ideas of Adama, is not trying to own the data, but just to be a composable way to combine existing web services, but they are not hidden behind Adama. They should be completely transparent, who they were, where they came from. Adama is just doing small transformations, small mashups of the existing APIs, and if all this, what I showed, this example look very abstract, again, you have to think in your example cases, and that what this is allowing you is to display at the end of the day with the cool Sci apps on the Araport website, all the information. This is all back end, but it's allowing you to just display on the front end all the information.
So this is Matt Vaughn. I'd like to, so by the time the next developer call rolls around in 2 weeks, I expect that we'll have no working code around the provenance specification, but a couple of worked examples where we'll take existing services and try to describe them using this provenance spec, and perhaps we can discuss, the strengths and shortcomings of the specification, and the way that we're planning to implement it at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And perhaps in the future. I suspect it won't be a 1 hour conversation. So.
No, definitely, yes. That's probably going to take longer.
All right, great. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the agenda for today's call. If anybody else has any questions related to anything today or anything else, we have a few minutes left. If you have general questions about, Araport, developing apps, developing Adama adapters, or anything, now's a great time to ask. If anybody has any questions, we can throw it up on the Google Doc or on the Hangout Q&A.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I hope that I'm not cutting anybody off while they're typing, but it looks like that there's no questions, and we're good to go. As always, the developers Google group that is linked to from the Araport Dev Zone is a great place to post questions whenever you're having problems with anything. You can always interact with us that way, or send an email to araport@jcvi, and that's a great way to get your questions or comments or violent dissent into our system to make sure that somebody will see it and get back to you related to whatever is going on.
Yeah, I think it will be useful, and I'm planning to start at least 2 threads on the Araport Google groups, just as a way to start asking for the input. So one thread about the Python SDK and functionality that developers may want, and the other for the provenance. So maybe that will spark the discussion.
Yeah, I think that'll be great. All right, cool. Well, then at that point, I'd say we're finished with today's Araport developer call. Thank you, everybody, for joining and attending, and thank you, Walter, for the great demo and discussion of upcoming features in Adama. They look really awesome. The Swagger UI, I've heard about it already, but still, seeing the documentation automatically appear is really impressive. I think that's really cool.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, guys.
All right, thanks, everybody. See you next
Bye.
time.